Okay, the recording has begun. I'm going to close that. And then I want to bring this up as well. Don't need to see the people. So anyway, if I go down, if you look at this, verse 2 says, you have this distinction. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. And the word men, if you look over across in the descriptive literal translation, it is the word the Adam, that is the human, began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. So there, it's very clear. The very first verse of chapter 6 says that we're talking about the Adam and the daughters of the Adam. That is, and the Adam, it's not just this. See, this is not when, this is one of those places where our translation men from the word Adam is a little bit unfortunate because it does not convey what Adam actually does. Adam is not men as such. See, we don't recognize the nature of the distinction between the Adam, the humans, and the word men as whatever. And I understand the word men carries that concept as well of being human. But when you think about how God could have used any one of several words here, but he used the word the human. That's what he created. That's what Adam and Eve were. They were both Adam. And so it's not when men just began to multiply, but when the human literally began to multiply on the face of the earth. So then they had daughters were born to them. So daughters were born. And then we have this, there's a distinction that he sets up here, that the sons of God saw the daughters of not just daughters of men. So you had sons of God, and you got these men who were different humans. They weren't godly. So it's not between godly men and the daughters of ungodly people, ungodly humans. That's not the issue. These were the sons of God and the daughters of humans. So whatever these sons of God were, there's a distinction that is clear here. It's not that it's not that the sons of God saw the daughters that they were fair, but they saw the daughters of the Adam, of the human. So they saw the daughters that were human. They saw human daughters, if you want to say it that way. So the sons of God saw human daughters, and that tells you there's something different about human daughters and sons of God. And it says, because they saw them because they existed good. They were fair, we say and they took unto them. And listen, this is where the problem comes in as well in our translations. They took them wives. The word that is translated wives is not, there's no such word in Hebrew. The word is woman. So woman, and the plural is women. So literally they took to them women. There was no marrying going on. There was just these sons of God taking to themselves women. And there's still no clear statement. But then we have God saying, my spirit will not strive. Get out of here. My spirit will not strive with the Adam. So if we keep going down, we keep focusing on that Adam to indefinite time. So he says, my spirit will not always strive with man. Men, daughters of men, with man, all of those are that statement that these were humans. So there's some kind of a contrast between sons of God and daughters of men, but it's not poetic parallelism. It's just a simple statement. And if we go down to the Hebrew text down here, and you can see very, very clearly Here's verse 2 over here. Vayiru b'nei ha-Elohim. B'nei ha-Elohim. Very, very, very distinctive term for sons of God. And so this says, then the sons of God saw Eth Benoth ha-Adam, the daughters of the Adam. So they saw the daughters of the Adam. And then they took them, we go down a little bit farther. Then they took to them women. The word is nashim. That's the female of, if you will, ish. An ish is a male human being typically, but it can be more collective. And the word for the feminine would be the isha. But when you take isha and you go to the plural, it doesn't become ishim, it becomes nashim. And this is the plural of the word woman. So thus it is women. They took women from the entirety. They took to themselves women from the entirety. And what was the entirety? The entirety which they chose. And you don't even get the sense necessarily that the women may have been receptive to the advances of these sons of God. They may have been. I would expect that likely they were, because these would have been very powerful beings. But there's no evidence of these beings marrying anywhere. But then as we go over to, and so let's go back one moment. Part of the key to this is this terminology. Then the sons of God saw the daughters of men. So the sons of God is B'nai Ha-Elohim. That is a construct, absolute relationship, literally the sons of the God. The sons of the God. So they saw the sons of the God. And when we go over to Job, and when we go down, you can go down here to verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came, and there's another occurrence of this down a little farther, when the sons of God came at another time. And so we have chapter 2, verse 1. There was a day when the sons of God came. When we look at this in verse 6 and in chapter 2, verse 1, we'll find that here's the terminology. Vayihi hayom. Now, so there existed the day. Vayavo'u b'nei ha-Elohim. And there's the term, B'nai Ha-Elohim. And if we go down now to chapter 2, and let's see if I can go down here pretty quickly. If we go down to 2, verse 1, we have essentially the same terminology. Vayihi hayom, then existed the day. Vayavo'u, then came. And who came? B'nai Ha-Elohim. Those two occurrences in Genesis 6 of the terminology B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of the God. That's literally what it is. It's the sons of the God. That terminology in Hebrew only occurs 4 times in that form in the entire Hebrew Bible. And in Job, the 2 times in Job, there is no question at all that the sons of the God are angelic beings. And Satan came also among them. So here's this one who is in rebellion to God who came among them. So when the sons of God, they are angelic beings. And thus, when we go back to the text of Genesis, we have to realize that this term, B'nai Ha-Elohim, and again, and its use just a little bit farther down, B'nai Ha-Elohim in verse 4. So those 2 usages in verses 2 and 4, chapter 6, must be identifying angelic beings. They're referring to angelic beings, which are not Adams. They are distinct from Adams, but they are angelic beings. Now, so that's the thing. It's not poetic. And now, Jeff, I'm not sure. Can you rephrase your question again, please? Could you do that?
Yes, I didn't think it was poetry, but I wondered if, in as it's called, narrative like this, just recounting, that if there was the contrast that would be equivalent to um, contrasting parallelism. So if it's contrasting,
Yeah.
you've got sons versus daughters and God versus man, and it does away with the idea of it being a line of Seth. That's what my thought was.
I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. You're saying sons of God contrasting with the word daughters.
Yes.
And then the word God contrasting with Ha-Elohim would be contrasting with Ha-Adam.
Yes.
And that would be some sort of a contrasting parallelism. The difficulty with that is that, and the reason that does not work, is there's a little word right here in before the word daughters. And that word tells us that this word, Banoth Ha'adam, the daughters of men, that is the object of the verb. The construction grammatically says, then the sons of God, that's subject, saw. And what did they see? They saw the daughters of the Adam. So, and the daughters of the Adam had been introduced above there. So it's not a contrasting parallelism so you're not contrasting sons of the God with the daughters of the human. It's not a contrast. It's a very similar construction, but when I say it's not a contrast, it's not a contrasting parallelism. There's a contrast because the B'nai HaElohim are distinctly different from those who would be called either B'nai HaAdam. See, those B'nai HaElohim would be different from the sons of the Adam, sons of humanity. So sons of God would be distinct from sons of the human. And so it's not so much the idea that you got B'nai contrast, sons contrasted with daughters, and God contrasting with man. That's not the issue. The issue is that because the term B'nai HaElohim, when you look at it, it's connected by the makef, and it tells you this is treated like it's one word in the Hebrew text. So sons of God, and they saw. What's interesting, there is another makef between the eth and the benot. They saw the daughters of the Adam, but there is no makef between the word daughters and the word Adam. So you see, it doesn't really fit to do that. So these would have been, and you have to, and the issue is this: you have to go back and you have to say that I have got to interpret the words. The words express exactly what God said and what he intended to communicate. And when he by his choice uses the term B'nai HaElohim only 4 times in all the places where there could be B'nai Elohim and B'nai Elim and all of that stuff, and all the places where there could be similarly translated terms, but they're different in Hebrew. All those places, but in all of those places, only 4 occurrences do it exactly this way. And that means this is distinctive. We say, well, there was the writers. See, the point that we got to go back to is that this was not decided by men. And it was not decided by, it's not a term that Moses used 2,700 years after creation. These are words that were given and would have been written long before Moses comes on the scene. And so, I mean, this is going to be written, as I recall, I think we had this. This would have been written probably by, could have been either Methuselah, or it could have been by Noah, or it could have been Lamech as well, but Lamech never took over the record. So the record would have gone direct from Methuselah to Noah because Lamech died before Methuselah did. And then Noah would have carried the record through the flood. And this would be the record of what really came about that was so destructive that God had to destroy all, quote unquote, humankind on the face of the earth. So that fact that B'nai Ha-Elohim only occurs in that form 4 times, twice here, twice in Job 1 and 2, that is a distinctive statement that God has made in this form. And thus there is a great contrast, but it's sons of God contrasted with daughters of men. It's not sons contrasted with daughters and God contrasted with men. It's so does that explain it? So these are not, the B'nai Ha-Elohim had nothing to do with Seth. They were not Sethites or Shemites, if you will, even because Shem hasn't even been born yet. Likely, it's possible he could have been born at this time because he was born 98 years before the flood. But this,
where did the Seth thing come from?
What?
Where did the Seth thing come from?
The Seth thing, because people say they were the sons of God would have been godly men.
Oh.
So, but see, the term sons of God does not say godly men.
Mm-hmm.
And people want to take the New Testament use of sons of God, which we are sons of God through Jesus Christ, but they want to take the New Testament terminology and put it back on the Hebrew words. But you can't do that. That's the antithesis of the design of God. See, this meant something when it was written, and what it said when it was written was distinct, and it was clear, it was unequivocal. So there would have been absolutely no ambiguity when this was written pre-flood. And so, you look at this and there's no other way to take it. And it's not about, well, godly men began taking ungodly daughters of humans. The godly men were humans. But the godly men didn't take ungodly women. So, by the way, Jeff, did you see the, what was that? Was that to Doug Carragher, the thing?
He asked people who would be the person that.
Yeah, Doug Carragher had asked people on Facebook about if they had,
when they got to heaven, who would be the first?
When they got to heaven, who would be the first
after the Lord?
After the Lord that they would like to see. And this one lady said, I'd like to see Mrs. Noah.
I saw that, Daddy.
Yeah.
Yes, but see, Mrs. Noah would have. Can you? We can't even imagine that the man Noah, if Noah had married a woman of questionable godly character or an ungodly woman, then how could he have been distinctively, really uniquely godly as God said he was when he told him to come on the ark? So that means Mrs. Noah was a woman of extremely godly character And I would say, doubtless, a woman whose character in godliness was essentially a perfect reflection of her husband. There would have been, it's not the matter that, well, how it is. See, we judge by our present day, and because
And that would go,
and,
for Mrs. Job as well, would it not?
oh yes, and see, I bring that out about Mrs. Job.
But I never
Yeah,
thought about
By the way,
exactly.
you should have, and we intend to go into Mrs. Job today, but Mrs. Job. Let me wait to go into Mrs. Job a little bit. I love to talk about Mrs. Job, but I can tell you.
Now I've got you in trouble, because Mrs. Job was also mentioned today. He was preaching from Job. It wasn't quite the typical Mrs. Job, but it definitely leaned the typical, just curse God and die, type thing.
Oh my. And that was today.
Yep. That he said.
Yes, that was today. It wasn't quite as far as some take it, but it still definitely leaned that way. But nobody stops to think, like you were saying, Job would not have been married to some ungodly woman. That doesn't even work.
Well, but think about it too. What would have been, let's just suppose for a moment, Heather, that you were married to a man that God had said of this man that he was perfect, that he is Tom. He was totally complete. He was a complete man in the estimation of God. He was perfect. He was upright. Yashar. He feared God. That is, he related to God properly. And what's the next thing? And he turned from anything evil. So when he saw evil before him, he turned. It doesn't mean he turned and went around the other way. It's that he turned from going into the evil. He may have just turned aside, whatever was necessary, but he turned from the evil. And God said that of that man, Job, 3 times. So if you were married to a man like that, what kind of effect and influence do you think that man would have had on your life?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That would have influenced you toward righteousness. But a man like that I would say he would not have married if he eschewed evil. He wouldn't have been married to some ungodly woman. I mean, wouldn't that be accurate?
I would say that's a correlation. We don't get the idea that Job was a regular ungodly human. Let's take an example of someone, and let's pick someone who doesn't want to be picked for this example. We're going to pick me. Job was not a man. We don't have any evidence that Job was a man who did his own thing for most of his life and did not even begin to turn to God until after he was married and well established and so forth. That's not the evidence of a man like Job. God says he is singularly righteous. And so in that respect, the man Job would have been, he had to be someone who had learned godliness young in his life, and he didn't have a lot of baggage that he carried into his later life. Say, as a believer, he didn't have a lot of baggage that he had to overcome. Was he perfect from the modern day perspective? No, but he was perfect from the biblical perspective, that he was complete, meaning that he knew exactly how to take care of those things when he violated the design of God. So you look at that and you think, but this is the kind of thing, because these angels were called sons of God. And let me tell you, for those of you who wonder, my Hebrew mentor, Dr. James D. Price, a true biblical scholar, when we studied this passage in Hebrew, and he made clear to us and there was no question at all that this passage said that the sons of God, and he pointed out that the terminology was only used twice here and twice in Job. He pointed out that the sons of God were angelic beings. They were obviously angelic beings who had violated the Creator's design. And that those, you think about it, and then they had offspring with women. There is nothing that says angelic beings who are all mature males. There is nothing that says they could not have offspring with human women. Nothing says that. And the nature of those offspring, they would, well, let's put it this way. Noah was not such. Noah was not. He was perfect. He was complete in his generations. There was no admixture of this shall we say, angel blood in him. But, you know, we look at that and we think about it. And when Dr. Price taught us that, he said, now this is what he said. It was almost a shocking thing to all of us in the class, because after he had taught us unquestionably and distinctively that the sons of God who cohabited with the daughters of the human, when he taught us that they were clearly by the scripture, the Hebrew scriptures, they were angelic beings. Then he said, but I choose not to believe that. That's what he said. He said, I choose not to believe that because I don't like the implications of that fact.
Oh my, Dr. Price said that.
Dr. Price said that, and we almost all
Wow.
fell out of our chairs.
Wow.
Yeah, he said, yes, this is what the text says. Yes, this is the authority, but I choose not to believe it because I don't like the implications of that.
He didn't like the thought of it.
He didn't like that thought that angels could cohabit with human women. And as I said, we sat there and went, wow, okay, whatever you say, Dr. Price.
Yeah. Brother Sheets,
Yes.
something to inject about the angels, though. Are these not fallen angels which how would I say, took the authority upon themselves, maybe because they had the ability to create human bodies that they could inhabit? These were not their original bodies, were they? Because that's what the argument, a lot of people would say, well, they can't, angels are, can't reproduce and all that.
Yeah, I would say that the primary body of angelic beings is that which would look just like a human. That'd be the primary body. They could, by the difference in their dimensionality versus human dimensionality that we live in, they could take over the body of another creature. They could look like something, but they still existed, apparently, shall we say, in bodies that were as mature male human beings. And there's nothing that shows them unusual
and has fallen,
except in certain locations. But it seems, and I say their primary body that they showed seemed to be that of a mature male human being. Could they take other forms? Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. What kind of with what you were just saying there, would that not make sense with like godly angels? Like, for example, when Gabriel appeared to Mary, to Zacharias, apparently he looked like an adult male human. Would that not be accurate, kind of in the same vein?
Yes, almost every time that they appeared to humans, they
Or
appeared
in
to come in.
Daniel, I mean, anywhere.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
the vision of heaven, we have these things. We have there the four living creatures. There are the four beasts or something like that. They weren't beasts. They were 4 living creatures. Then, and also in Ezekiel, as we say, when Ezekiel saw the whale way up in the middle of the air, something like that, as the song says, they could take on different forms in those settings. And that would have been all because these angels, in this case, the cases we're talking about now, they are all acting in perfect accord with the design of the Creator. So they would be taking whatever form he saw fit to manifest his glory and his greatness to the created beings. But for beings to come in to daughters of humans, they are not going to come in as wolves or bulls or some kind of
Creature.
half creature or something like that, that's going to be a terror to people, if you will. They come in and they're just like mighty and powerful men. And
Just like on Star Trek.
so yeah, my wife said, just like on Star Trek. Well, keep in mind, Gene Roddenberry, the man who is the writer of virtually everything in the original Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry took his cue on virtually all of the stories that he did until they started getting kind of crazy, the modern ones. But he took his cues from the Old Testament, from the Bible. That's where he got it.
You know what? Interesting that you would even bring that up, because just the other morning I was listening to Genesis Science Network, and he has a playlist called The Evolution of Evolution. And one of the men he talked about, I believe it's H.G. Wells, he was kind of the founder of the modern science fiction genre. So it's interesting, his worldview of evolution, and he ended up doing science fiction stuff, the half man, half whatever stuff. Kind of interesting. It parallels.
Yeah. Hold just a minute here. I'm looking for something too. Let me go back over to here. Go.
And we also have in the chat box, someone is bringing up the 2 angels that spoke to Abraham. They appeared as men. And then we also
even the Lord appeared as a man. He was distinctly the Lord, but he obviously came as a man because they were going to feed him, just like they'd feed any visitor to their camp. So yes. But go ahead, Becca.
And then there was also a question, were these the angels in Jude that left their first habitation?
Oh, you mean like that right there in front of us? Let's I don't know how much I've written of this. Let's look for a minute at Jude and go down here, go to the end. The short answer to that question, would these angels have been the angels of Jude? The short answer is yes, unequivocally, absolutely, they were. But having looked at, where's the Peter text? Didn't I open? I thought I opened 2 Peter. Let me go back. I'm going to open up 2 Peter as well. That bears on this. 2 Peter 2:4-9, angels. Okay, when we look at the at 2 Peter, and we have 3 things that are mentioned that are major issues of what we would call Hebrew or the ancient Hebrew history. And these 3 major things are, one, as he says here, for if God spared not the angels that sinned. And these angels that sinned, the way they sinned, they sinned in such a terrible way that they were cast down to hell. That is, we could see that a little bit below. I don't know if I have a descriptive literal translation. I do not. I still have the Greek text. So they were cast down to Tartarosas, and they were in, shall we say, kept in reserve. That's what the words actually say. These angels were delivered into Tartarus, and they were kept in chains under darkness, reserved unto judgment. Notice they were reserved. It's not that they were no longer free. They're reserved unto judgment. And then, so that was, the first thing was angels that sinned. The second thing was, if God spared not the old world, but saved Noah. So what is he talking about? Well, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. That was such a cataclysmic event. It has never even been, and nothing close to it has ever occurred in world history in 6,000 years. And then we have the third thing, and that's if God, turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow. So God condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was something that we have never seen the likes of, where he rained down the fire and brimstone from heaven. And people say, well, that could have been a volcano or something. There is no mention of any physical source of this fire and brimstone. It's something that happened directly by the power and working of God. And so he condemned them. They were condemned, and God delivered Lot out of that. He delivered Lot. So, and that's the key. But now think, 3 different incomprehensible occurrences of judgment. Angels that sinned, the old world by the flood, and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. Those 3 things. Now, that's what Peter said, and he uses that, and he says, if God knew how to do this, boy, he can save a righteous man. He knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations. And the answer, does he know that? Absolutely. Unquestionable. Because he could do these things. How simple would it be for him to deliver the godly out of temptations? Just as he did Lot. So now we go over to the text of Jude, and Jude is writing same kind of thing. And look at the 3 things that Jude mentions. He saved the people out of the land of Egypt. And you say, well, he saved these people. But think about it. You say, well, so what? He let them out of Egypt. Think about how they got out of Egypt. After they crossed Sinai, he has the waters of the Red Sea stand like a wall on each side, and they cross on dry land. That is a singular occurrence. You say, well, he did that with the Jordan River for them later. That was a river. We're talking about the whole Gulf of Aqaba, part of the Red Sea. And then later, he brought judgment on the ones who did not believe. Then the second thing that he speaks of is the angels. And you notice here he says, which kept not their first estate. That is, these angels, consider, the angels of which he speaks here are angels who did not stay within the design criteria which had been established for them. They left their own habitation. And you can look at we go through this in the Greek text whenever we do Peter and Jude. But so that was the second thing. So the saving of the people out of the land of Egypt. Then the next great thing was the angels that kept not their first estate. Guess what? That's the first thing that Peter had mentioned in his text as well. And then the next thing is even as Sodom and Gomorrah. These would be in the history of the Hebrews that are just incomprehensibly great, demonstrating the power of God and what he did. And there's more explanation here about this, But you see, what was the third thing over in Peter? It was the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The only thing different, Peter also referred to the old world being destroyed by the flood. And the thing that was different from Peter that Jude did, he referred to the people being saved out of the land of Egypt, and then God's destruction in the wilderness of them that believe not. So this thing, Sodom and Gomorrah, both mentioned by Peter and Jude, angels that kept not their first estate but left their own habitation, those angels that did that, and Peter gives the information that these angels that sinned, they were cast down to hell and delivered into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Whatever these angels did, it was such a terrible, terrible thing that God still has them reserved in chains of darkness unto a day of judgment. They're still there. And this would have been, you think about it, how great was the flood in Israelite or in Hebrew history? Incomprehensible. How great was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? Incomprehensible. How great was it that the people were saved out of the land of Egypt, and then they were destroyed in the wilderness because they didn't believe? That was a major, major thing. Those were major things in the history of the Hebrews. Now, you can go back. You can go back, and everybody that has the least brain will go back, and he will see that, well, if God spared not the old world, oh, that's about the flood, when he brought in the flood. Okay, the flood. Nobody who believes Scripture questions the flood having occurred. Cities of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed for their violation of his design. That's what Jude brings out. The cities around them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, violating God's design for the relationship between the genders, especially, and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. You know, this is unquestionable. So the next thing is, that means that these angels, which kept not their first estate, but left their habitation, and are now reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment day, those angels and the same angels who are indicated in Peter as having sinned and then being cast down to hell, having been delivered into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, those angels are another mighty, powerful, unquestionably occurring instance in those Hebrew scriptures. But when you go back, there is no such thing, no instance of that, unless they were the sons of God who violated God's design for them to remain separate from human women. And those sons of God and the daughters of the Adam and those sons of God violated the design of God, and they are the angels that sinned. You say, well, there's got to be another thing in the Old Testament. Okay, I'll give you that. Now find it. It does not exist. I've studied the Old Testament a little bit. There is no other possibility at all. So come on, it's got to be there. These other things are there. What's so hard about this? You know what's so hard about it? We got a bunch of men nowadays who don't study the scriptures as God gave them. That's what's hard about it. That's what's wrong. They're preaching what they heard somebody else say, and they don't even evaluate it to find out if it's accurate. These angels mentioned both by Peter and Jude. This would be a major, major thing. And there is no major thing involving angels except that violation of the sons of God in Genesis 6 when they cohabit with the daughters of the Adam. And you know what? I have never, Jeff, I'm going to say, I have never yet heard one preacher who preached Genesis 6 go back to Peter and Jude to point out that instance in the New Testament. They don't do it.
Hmm.
No, they don't.
No. I was also
And the
going,
question, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was also thinking just now that the men of Sodom and Gomorrah thought they could go in, or thought they could take the angels to themselves.
Oh,
Yes.
So they
Yes.
appeared as legitimate, physical men for their evil desires.
That's right. And that's why I say the primary body shape that angels appear to have taken throughout the scriptures was that of a mighty human being, a mature male human being. And you say, what about the angels? What about the Keruvim? We say cherubim. What about the Keruvim who guarded the way to the tree of life? And then they have these flaming swords which turn in all directions. Did they look like bulls, or did they look like Tyrannosaurus Rex, or did they look like some kind of a half and a half thing? No, they would have looked just like powerful beings, powerful angelic beings, like mature men, male human beings, and wielding swords, just like mature male human beings would eventually wield swords. They did. Nobody was fighting at that time because you only had to, it was only Adam and Eve, and they weren't wielding swords at one another. But when God put them there, what's interesting, Jeff, is think about it. And we're going into that here in a minute. Those angels were still there the day the flood came upon the earth. The garden was still there. The tree of life was still there. The tree of the knowledge and good and evil was still there. The garden was totally intact with everything for the first 1,652 years of human history. And then the flood came. And then the garden went the way that God would have it to go.
Did you say
But-
with the angel and the flaming sword there as well as a testimony?
I'm sorry, would you what?
Complete with the angel and the flaming sword as a testimony to
up until the flood.
Yeah.
up until the
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt that those angels and their flaming swords guarding the way were there all through that 1,652 years. There is absolutely nothing that says that the garden was suddenly disappeared in some way. That garden was still there. It was still a testimony to men, and men still went contrary to God. And those angels were there, and no one could get to the tree of life. They could not get to it. But I'm persuaded men could see those angels. They knew they were there. They knew how they got there. This wasn't something that was written down 2,700 years after creation. This would have been written down by Adam. That's why I'm saying this idea that people have promoted for so much, that, well, Moses didn't use previously existing documents. People who say that don't know the scriptures, and they have an evolutionary perspective of the scriptures and of linguistics. They have been led astray by the liberal theology that's out there. You know what? Let's go over here a minute to another paper here.
We have another comment that came into the chat box. I don't know if you're wanting to address it.
What was it?
I believe what is happening now, to include the satanic torture and sacrifice of children and trafficking, etc., and the mark of the beast to come is part of the seed war. Satan likes to mimic what Jesus does in the opposite spectrum.
Yes. You know, you can look back in human history, and all of those who were major leaders against God through history, as soon as they came into sufficient power, they began teaching the children according to their anti-God perspective. You think about what the Nazis did, the Hitler Youth. I mean, how else could you begin to get boys of 12 years old to go out into a war that is incredible, the way World War II was, and yet they go out and they're going to be killed by the thousands and thousands, and they think they're dying for something that's worth dying for the Führer. And you look around, you look at all these other things, this kind of thing that happens whenever violation occurs, and when, oh wow, what is the verse that says? Hold on. I can't remember the verse, but I can remember where it is. Here, get over there. Let's go there. Now, let's go back. And you say, Brother Sheets, why don't you remember the verses? Because I don't focus on memorizing. I focus on knowing what they say and what the significance is. And that's what a bunch of preachers ought to be doing someday. So let's see here. Let's go to Ketuvim. And I think it's in the Psalms. And I'm thinking that it is, I'm thinking it's Psalm 12, which is, it's amazing to me how dumb people can be. Oh yeah, Psalm 12:8. The wicked walk on every side. What? When the vilest men are exalted. And we could go down and we could look at that in the Hebrew text. So you have the same basic idea in the Hebrew text. When you have wicked men being exalted in the exaltation of Zeluth, Livnei Adam. So when you exalt, when these people, the vilest men, get into power and get into influence, then they make it easy for the wicked to walk on every side. And the wicked are looking for those opportunities to take the children, to influence the children, to rear them. And we could say, by the way, Eric, I would probably not give this credit to Satan, though Satan to me, Satan is but one emissary of this whole anti-God belief system. He's just one representative, but he is not the personification of it. He is just one. This kind of situation exists because humans rejected and resisted the design of God. And it's not Satan's fault Satan could have deceived Eve, and Eve did not have to violate. Eve could have said, Adam, you're here with me. What should I do? And Adam, if he had any sense, would have said, no, honey, don't eat. God said we're not to eat, and we're going to remain within the design of God. And then even after she did and gave the fruit to him, he could have said, no, honey, I am not going to eat. I'm going to remain in the design of God because I am God's primary representative over the creation. He could have said that, but he did not. He took it and he ate it. In other words, he thought in his mind, before he ever bit into it, he thought in his mind that he possessed the authority to violate the design of the Creator. And we still live in that. Was Satan an effective tool in getting the woman to violate? Yes. He was very good at it. The scripture says he was more subtle, that is, he was more clever than any beast of the field. But he didn't do it. And he did not have the power to change the entirety of the creation. That happened when Adam violated of his own free will, and then the alienation that has existed from that time. So I don't give Satan credit. I put the because what God said, resist the devil and he will flee. In other words, Satan has no power over humans, but as humans choose to submit themselves to his influence. And that is humans. That is not Satan. He doesn't have such power. He had to come before God just like all the rest of them when God says come. There's no war. There's no war between God and Satan. Yeah, Stephen, what you said, the reference to the fallen angels also could not refer to the original angelic rebellion. And see, but where is that original angelic rebellion described in Scripture to any degree? It's not. It's yes, they did it, but we learn of that later. This was all in those Old Testament scriptures. So he says those angels are held in chains. Yes, we still have demonic activity, so not all angels are bound. And that's the fact. Some are bound. Those that violated are bound. But those that did not violate in that same way, they're still out there. They're still active demonic forces. And so you say this reinforces the point that the angels referenced were those who took human women. Absolutely. And let's go over to before we go, we're going to run out of time today. But before we go over into some of this material more about cursing and blessing, and by the way, Vivian, I have not forgotten to send that document to you. I will send it.
Thank you. I didn't think you
be,
did.
I may not send it until 1993. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's the next time 1993 comes around.
Okay. All right.
So, and I don't even believe things like that. People say, well, history is cyclic. No, history is not cyclic. Come on, give me a break. Cyclic, that cyclic view of history is also evolutionary, and it is anti-God. So anyway, But the first verse of the Hebrew scriptures, Genesis 1:1, is the aboriginal use of the words there. And now aboriginal does not have to do with the Aborigines, okay? Aboriginal means the very first, the original of the original, so to speak, okay? And by the way, when you run into a word that you don't understand, look it up. Look it up and find out what it means. Certainly the words existed in the mind of the writer before he wrote them. We're talking about Genesis 1:1. And the distinct meanings and significances. Now, let me point out, you notice I said distinct meanings and significances. See, we often think, well, we're going to get this dictionary meaning, but when God used a word in a certain place, it not only had a meaning in that context, it had a significance. And when the more you study the scriptures as God wrote them in the languages he chose, you find that there were some places where he would use one word and it's translated into English by a certain word. And then there's another place where you find the same word in English, but the words are not the same in Hebrew or in Greek. God often changed the words, and when he changed those words, he did it very purposefully. The words had a significance in addition to their meaning, because we think of meanings like a dictionary meaning. So they have a significance. So the distinct meanings and significances which they possessed in his mind moved him to write them as he did. But the words had not originated in his finite human understanding. These words were written by the first human, the Adam, named Adam by the transcendent creator who brought him into existence. And the linguistic abilities of Adam had been built into him by the creator. And at the time of his creation, no alienation existed between the human and the creator. Thus, that man's use of the words of Genesis 1:1 were in perfect conformity to the meanings and significances of God, the creator himself. Adam's thinking and his writing were in full accord with the design of God, and thus the words he used and their meanings and significances, notice I keep putting those two together. You need to think that way. If you deal with the biblical languages, you got to think of meanings and the significance of those meanings in that context. So their meanings and significance had been framed in his mind by the creator who built his human language into him. That first Adam, from the very beginning of his existence, had been designed and enabled by God to write. Listen, this is important to see. That first Adam, from the very beginning of his existence, had been designed and enabled by God to write. And he did just that. By the time of the departure of Cain and the birth of Seth, some 130 years after creation, Adam had experienced many events and, doubtless, the birth of many descendants as he and his woman sought to fulfill the Creator's design. He had recorded the Creator's description of the origin of the creation, that's chapter 1. The special origin of human beings, that's chapter 2. His own violation of the Creator's design, that's chapter 3. And the effects of alienation on human interactions, that's chapter 4. But Adam, listen, Adam would not have waited for over 100 years after his origin to begin writing. Adam was designed to write, and he did. And the content of his writing, which may have been quite extensive, would have covered the things of his daily experience, not the least of which was his interaction with the Creator as he and the Creator communed in the garden. Thus, Adam's writing would have begun before his violation, before any alienation of any kind existed between him and God. He would have been doing those things which the Creator had designed him to do, one of which was writing in his perfect alphabetic language, Adamite, the language which, still unchanged many years later, would be called Hebrew. Adam's words then and his grammatical constructions, see, God put it all into him. He didn't just give him an alphabet and a vocabulary and say, now you make up the grammar. God built the whole thing into this man because he was talking to the man on the first day. And within that first day, that day 6, within hours after he's created at the most, Adam's words then and his grammatical constructions, both of Genesis 1:1 and the entirety of the first 2 chapters of Genesis, were all written before any potential future corruption of his thinking by his violation and alienation from the Creator. So if there had been any concept that his thoughts would have been corrupted after his violation in his quote unquote fallen state, Genesis 1 and 2 were all written before that. God had not yet expelled Adam and his woman from the garden, and the garden in its every perfect aspect still existed, and it was still the home of the first 2 humans. So when Adam is writing Genesis 1 and 2, he still lives in the garden, folks. You say, well, where do you get paper and where do you get a pen and where? You know, we can't even imagine the brilliance of the man Adam or what God provided to him to do all of those things. Those original words then, the words of Adam, recorded by him and now known as the first 2 chapters of Genesis, expressed the meanings and significances, there are those 2 terms together, intended by God and built into Adam by God. They were the words of a human, but they were the words of that human as that human had received them from God, thus making them an exact and accurate representation of the events and the conditions they describe. In this respect, Adam was the first of the holy men of God who inscribed the scriptures as they were borne along by the Spirit of God. Though Moses too was a holy man of God and was greatly used by God to inscribe much scripture, he was not the original author of the records of God which existed before he was born in 1526 BC. And that some 2,600 years before Moses' birth, Adam had been designed and created to write. And he, that first human, the only male human being to ever interact with God in the garden, had begun the record of God. His godly descendants, like other holy men of God, had preserved that record. The Sefer, that's the word Sefer. It's the record. It's not the word book. We call it book nowadays, but it's the Sefer, the record, that which was recorded. That record was the Sefer of God, and they continued to develop it as these holy men of God, like all the later writers of Scripture, perceived the leading of the Spirit of God to do so. Moses was not the first writer, and indeed, much other Hebrew writing existed in his day. But he was, like all the others, one who sought and sensed the Holy Spirit's direction regarding the content which was the record of God, and which he was to copy and incorporate as the words now called Genesis. Like Adam, Moses knew the words were neither his nor those of any human. They were the words of God. So, and that was, attached that to the paper on the dimensionalities, and someday I'll weave it more into the next part of this paper. But wow. Oh, just a moment. Ah, here's the one that you were looking for. Follow with me for just a couple of minutes. I'll send this to you, and then we can. I have to put it into a PDF because if you don't have BibleWorks fonts on your computer, then the BibleWorks fonts will look like gobbledygook. By the way, if you don't have the BibleWorks fonts, send a note to Miss Miller, and you can send that note to her. And I think you still have that that location where they can go and get the BibleWorks fonts, don't you, Rebecca?
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. You don't mind me putting that on you, do you?
Not at all.
I didn't think so.
I would keep those fonts on OneDrive, Brother Sheets.
Email address into the chat box here.
What did Stephen say?
What'd you say, Stephen?
I would keep those fonts on OneDrive because we don't know how much longer the BibleWorks website is going to be available.
Yeah. So, and quite honestly, I don't even know how available it is right now.
I have a
But,
copy somewhere too in case, but
Okay. So, have you downloaded them onto a file?
I have them all on my OneDrive, including the installation.
Okay. All right. Very good. I probably need to get that from you. I haven't been in there doing that for I don't know how long. So,
No problem.
okay, thank you. But now notice this, just quickly. In the first 2 chapters of the book of Job, English Bible versions have almost all translated 4 of the 6 occurrences of the Hebrew word for blessing, barak, into words and expressions which, to the English mind, directly contradict its basic meaning and its distinctly positive significance. Remember, meaning and significance. They're important, both of them. These contradictory translations have led not only to a wide range of misunderstandings of the individuals in the book, but also, because of the foundational nature of these chapters, they've led to complete misinterpretations of the book and God's purpose in giving it. The blessing of God is that perfect interaction which flows from the Creator to the beings of his creation as they function in the creation according to his perfect design. Though this blessing flows to all beings, it is especially important in the life of his Adam, his humans, those beings created in his image and likeness. This same blessing can and does flow from any one of his creatures to any other, as the one seeks to relate to the other according to the criteria of his perfect design. Thus, one person can bless another, or a human can bless God by relating to that other person or to God as God has set the criteria for that relationship. This is the design of God, and it cannot be changed. But many, lacking an accurate understanding of the actual words of Scripture and their meanings, not the least of which is the word barak, have greatly misrepresented not only Job, Mrs. Job, and their friends, but also the book's view of God and his purpose in providing this revelation of himself so soon after the flood and the Babel rebellion. Accurate word meanings are essential for understanding. Certainly, the originators of these questionable translations thought that they perceived something in the text or in their theological understanding which dictated such renderings. But what they did not perceive is the nature and degree of misunderstanding which they introduced into the English text. Instead of clearly, and the problem is because they put it into English, and then you had English-speaking individuals who would not seek to know the Hebrew and Greek words which would underlie those texts. They wouldn't seek that understanding. They just said, well, whatever the English word means to me, that's what it means. And that's just about as dumb as you can get. instead of clearly and accurately conveying the content of these chapters into the receptor language, the translators introduced obscurity and error, and this error has led many to misinterpret and misapply these 42 chapters, that's Job, which comprise some of God's earliest written revelation, preceded only by most of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. See, when you realize Job predates Abraham, and Abraham was called, so to speak, in Genesis 12, verse 1. That means Job lived during the era that would have been coincided with Genesis 11 or before. So you say, well, and then you have to ask the question, why would God write the book of Job even before Abraham, the father of all the faithful, comes on the scene? Why would he do that? And if you don't ask that question, then you got some serious problems with your understanding of God. And most guys out there have serious problems, I'm telling you. But look at this. Just 4 places here: Job 1:5, Job 1:11, Job 2:5, and Job 2:9 in this little table. And in these places, the word curse is used in the KJV and all these others, NKJV, CSB, Darby, NAS, ESV, NIV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these use the word curse, and these are translations of the word barak, which is the word bless. But they didn't translate the Hebrew word bless with bless. They translated the Hebrew word bless with the English word curse. And that's what all of these translations did in Job 1:5. And then in Job 1:11 and 2:5, all of these translations used that same word curse. And in Job 2:9, all of these translations used that same word curse to translate the Hebrew word for bless, barak. Then you go down, you say, well, there were others. They didn't use curse. They used terms like blaspheme or renounce or speak evil, something like that. And you can see, by the way, the Geneva version, this was 1599. It predates the King James Version. They did the same thing. They just used other words, but it is not the word bless. And you can see all these versions in Genesis 1:5, 1:11, 2:5, and 2:9. They all use something different besides bless, something that is negative. Curse is a very negative concept in our vocabulary. Blaspheme, renounce, speak evil, those are negative. Look at this. Those same words are translated, the word barak, bless in Hebrew, is translated bless in only 2 of these primary English versions, only by the Douay-Rheims and the Young's Literal Translation in Job 1:5, only by the Douay-Rheims, Young's Literal Translation, and a translation of the Septuagint in 1:11 and 2:5, and only in the Douay-Rheims and Young's Literal. So basically, the Douay-Rheims and the Young's Literal are the only major English translations that translate the Hebrew word barak, which is the verb to bless. They're the only ones that translated it to bless. And you say, well, why? Why did they do that? That is a very good question. That's a very good question. So the translations in the KJV group are typically consistent in rendering barak by the word curse in all 4 references. The translations in the GNV, Geneva Bible group, are typically consistent in rendering barak by the word blaspheme, renounce, or speak evil, or some equivalent form in all 4 references. The Douay-Rheims and the Young's Literal Translation are the only significant versions which consistently rendered barak literally by its basic meaning bless in all 4 references. And I have a question for you. Why didn't somebody start reading and find out what was going on behind the scenes, i.e., that is in the Hebrew text? So, and you can see here the references that Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And cursed God, the word is blessed. They blessed God in their hearts. Satan to God. Hast thou not made a hedge about him? Thou hast blessed. Wow, look at that. Thou hast blessed. That is the Hebrew word for bless. And then you go right down into verse 11, just a few lines later, and he says, but put forth thy hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. But the word, if you look at the Hebrew text, here's berakta, and here yivarakeka. The same root. Barak is the same root there in both words. One's translated blessed, the other is curse. Can you imagine that this does not cause confusion? But where are the men? Where are the men who have evaluated what it actually said and sought to understand it and represent it as God wrote it? There's Job 121. What Job said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord had taken away. And let's see. And here it is. Yehi Shem Yihye Mavorak. There's that thing. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Satan's second challenge, he does the same thing. He says, put forth your hand and he will curse you. Literally, he will bless you to your face. His wife says, do you still retain your integrity? Curse God and die. But guess what? She used the same word, barak, the same word. So literally she said, bless God and die. What? Think about it. There is accurate preaching to be done from these words. But the kind of preaching that we have heard, that I have heard for 40 years, men are not representing the word of God as God gave it. And you could go on down through here, the rest of them, and we won't take the time to do it, but you can see there's a little bit of analysis. This is on page 6. We only go through 9 pages in this paper, but there is so much. There's so much, and it's not. This is not Brother Sheets doing this. It's either what God said or Brother Sheets is wrong. And the problem is we have a bunch of lazy dolts who are seeking messages, but they are not seeking to represent God as he's revealed himself. And you say, what? Well, they preach good messages. Yep. When did they ever correct the errors? When did they ever correct the errors of Genesis? When did they ever correct the errors of the way Job is used? When did they ever actually represent things that the way God said it? And if they're not doing it, they need to be doing the study that enables them to do so. But anyway, I guess we're past time, so we better stop here. And I better, let's see. Who is David Hill? Do we know David? Ah,
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well, it in a Psalm, well, 103 and verses 1 and 2. Well, it starts out with with bless the Lord. Well, now well, I believe the Hebrew Hebrew word is bariki.
yeah. So baraki, that's an imperative there, a PL imperative of barak. Yes, And it's the same thing at the beginning of verse 2, Dave. You're right.
Okay.
And so,
is that similar to the word? Well, as in Job, where it's translated a curse.
yes, same root word, exact same root word. And that's what is troubling.
Okay.
That text. It is, and that is the difficulty. And you can see, just like, let me go back up to the top here a little bit farther. And if we look at that, this idea where he said that my sons may have sinned and cursed God, you can see Beraku, because it's plural, but there's Barak. You go down to when God said, you've blessed him, that is Barak, Berakta. You go down to when he said, he will curse you, and that's an imperfect, of course, and it's Yevarakeka, and Barak is the root. And you can go down, and when he says, blessed be the name of the Lord, that is the Mavorak. All that is a PL participle of Barak. It's the same root, Barak. When Satan says again, he'll curse you, same word, Barak. When Mrs. Job says, curse God and die, it's Barak, same word, just a slightly different usage of that Barak root. And so it just, and you could go down and you go down and you go down. He talks, Job 29:13, the blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me. And that is birkath. That's a noun form of that same verb, related to that same verb. So you see, that's the issue. The verb barak has been translated in different ways that seem to be totally contrasting one another. Now, I can tell you, and we'll look at this next week, but when we look at it, I think you're going to see that when we take this, and if you just translated all of these by the verb bless, just translated them by the word bless, just like you said over in Psalm 103, Dave, just translate them by bless, you'll find there is a perfectly good explanation for why those people would use that in that way, whether it's Satan or whether it's Job's wife or who. So we'll put that out, and we'll look at this, see what we can come up with. Or if we don't see what we can come up with, we'll see what Brother Sheets has already come up with, and then we can fix that. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
You're welcome, my brother.
Did somebody else?
So, was there anything else before we get ready to close up here? Okay. If nothing else, I want to get stopped before Vivian starts asking questions, because she always asks hard questions.
Oh,
So-
no, did have a question, or it just came to mind that my finite mind, since the Garden of Eden was in existence and the cherubims, is that correct? Cherubims?
Keruvim. Keruvim.
With a V, cherubim.
Yeah.
Cherubim was there with the swords. It would appear that, Adam's descendants, they would be at the garden, or they would try to enter, or they would try to look at this beautiful Garden of Eden.
Oh, yes. No doubt.
and
Go
try
ahead.
to enter it. Of
Yeah, I would.
cherubim.
But I can also imagine that as they thought about entering, they
Mm.
also thought about encountering these mighty angelic beings. And what's interesting, we think of those two cherubim as standing in one place, one location, and they could not move. They were just right there, stuck right in that one place that covered this path going to the tree of life. But these beings these are angelic beings, and they can, for lack of a better term, they can fly. So they could move extremely quickly anywhere that they would need to be to protect the way to the tree of life. So there would not have been, if anybody could have gone in from any side of the garden, those angels were sufficient to cover all the way around the perimeter of the garden. But no one would be able to get into the tree of life, or even to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil again. So I think that's the key. I know I picture in my mind them standing at the entrance to a path that went to the tree of life. But at the same time, I realize that these were angelic beings that were not bound by the physics of our dimensionality, our universe, our natural world, if you will. They were bound only by the physics that God had built into them as angelic beings.
Yes.
So
Amazing. Yes.
yeah,
Thank you. Yes.
I think your point that what you said about being able to come up to it and look in and see it and know that you can't ever go back.
Yes.
Well,
The pain and the
Regret.
anguish. Yes. Regret. Yes.
yeah, yes. And you know what? I think we get pictures of that when, and I know I've seen it, and doubtless you have too. Those of us who have lived more than just a few years, we have seen people who have, shall we say, violated the design of God in ways that they can never go back and relive or erase. They can't go back. The damage has been done. And when they see someone whose life has not been damaged in that same way, they look at that life and they experience a measure of regret because they see the success and the good that's in the life of that individual. And they see the relationship with God, and they realize they have forfeited that relationship. And the sad part is, instead of recognizing that, and then recognizing as well that God has made a way of reconciliation, they won't do it. They keep going the wrong way. It's kind of incredible. And I say that because I did it. I saw godly people from a young age, and yet I wasn't saved until I was 29 years old. And I stop and think about it, and I think about how just plain merciful God was to allow me to continue longer until that time. And I know we could say, well, he knew you were going to get, he did know that, but that's not why I continued. That's not why. I could have been saved, and I could have been saved 2 weeks before I went into Marine Corps in 1965. When I went forward in church and made a profession of faith and knelt down at the altar and quote unquote prayed. But the only thing I wanted fire insurance in case I get killed in Vietnam and go to hell. I don't want to go to hell. But I did not want any lordship. I didn't want him to have any control of my life. I wanted to control my own life. You know what? Just like Adam and Eve, I wanted to decide good and evil for myself. And I could see good things in the lives of others, but I knew that they weren't within my grasp until after I came to Christ. So, anything else? Anyone?
Thank you. No.
You're sure welcome. So, Becca, anything? Any thoughts?
No, sir.
I have to tell you all, asking Rebecca if she has any thoughts is like saying, are leaves green in summertime? The answer, of course leaves are green in summertime. Does Rebecca have thoughts? Of course she does. But then she decides whether or not it's appropriate to use them at that time. So thank you, Becca.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, very good. We're going to stop our recording here. And
I sent you the Bible Works fonts, Brother Sheets, and Rebecca as well, just in case you have a problem finding them.
very good. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.
Mhm.